In chess, you're a warlord, you're a general, and you want to crush your enemies. How can you do that? Well, you're going to need some strong men. And that's exactly why, at the core of chess strategy, comes the very simple principle, do not leave a man behind. And what we're going to focus on here is activity, coordination, cooperation, and basically just playing as energetically as you can. Not wasting time and making sure that you have everybody there. Imagine that a big fight breaks out. Is it going to be you versus 10 guys? Well, what if you could have 10 bigger guys? Wouldn't you want to do that? I would assume almost everybody would. So in this case, we're going to talk about how in chess, that's essentially what we want to do. We want to make sure that, barring the ability to win immediately, unless they're getting checkmated or unless they're losing a lot of material right away, we want more pieces in the main arena of action. So what we're going to focus on here is, first we're going to focus on the concept of improving the worst place piece, or basically improving your lazy employee's conditions, or getting him into action, giving him a job, giving him something to do. So in this particular position, let's look around this position. So if I count the pawns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 3 minor pieces for both sides, 2 rooks for both sides, it's equal material. Okay. And if I look around the board, you can notice something. I mean, this d5 square, it's interesting to note that a black pawn cannot control it, so that is a potential square that could be a good square, for example, for a knight outpost. And if we look around the board and we think about, well, which one of our pieces isn't doing anything? In this particular position, the piece that's doing the least is this knight over here on a3. We can see our rook on e1 is developed, our queen is in the center defending the e4 pawn, our rook is on the open file, our bishop, while in theory not doing that much, can't really be improved because it's a light squared bishop and it's already on this diagonal sort of out of the way. So what can we do with that knight on a3? There's a saying that the knight on the rim is dim, but that's, sometimes it's not really true, because sometimes a knight can be over here or over here on h5 and attacking the king and hop right into action on f6. But if the knight is on the side of the board and has no good way to get into play, then it's usually not a very effective piece. So in this case, you see the pawn on a6 is controlling b5, so we can't go there. So what can we do with our knight to try to bring it into action, to try to get our forces mobilized? What we can do here is we can just play the move knight to c2. And what we can do after that is we can later bring our knight here and try to occupy the d5 square. Basically, our infantry does a little kind of cavalry run and hops into the d5 square. And this is a very nice square to occupy, also trying to take advantage of our bishop pinning the knight to the queen. So this is a nice way to make use of your close range infantry. And just for reference, one thing you could think of here is you can think of your pawns as foot soldiers, your hopping knight as close range infantry, your bishop as a sniper. You could call him Little Snipey if he was a rapper. And you could call your queen, well, let's think of your rooks as your brothers. When you're going to a fight, you want to bring your brother. You want to, if you have one, or your friends who you call brothers, but basically you want your bros by your side. So you don't want them, in another city. You want them to be with you. And of course, the queen is the bad bitch. And the queen is the baddest bitch of them all and makes all the other girls jealous. So you have to make sure that your bad bitch is a good bitch. So let's go on to another one. We're going to talk about the same concept again. Let's see. Okay. So here's another position, and this one looks like there's not much going on. You can see things are pretty locked up, so it's kind of a gridlock here on the board. So it might not look like there's that much going on. I want to mention 2 main points here. The first one is that when you have a closed position like this, and when I say closed position, I mean, look, we have 7 pawns here, but we have no open lines. We have only this half open. We call it a half open file when the file is open for our rooks but not open for theirs because they have a pawn on c6. So in positions which are closed and semi-closed like this, they're really blocked up. Usually what you want to do is you want to prepare a way to open up the game a little bit. And to open it up, you usually, not always, but usually have to use your foot soldiers. You have to use your pawns to break open the game. And so what that means is you'll usually want to prepare what we call a pawn break. So we create a break by creating contact with another pawn. In this particular position, we don't need to do it right away because that might actually help black's pieces that are sort of passive. So the best move, I'm just going to remove these little arrows here. The best move here is to not leave a brother behind. Don't leave your brother behind here, and the only piece that's really not taking place in the play, all of these pieces are in the center and taking part in controlling squares. The only piece not taking place is this rook here on f1. It's on its home square after castling and is not able to really do anything right now. So the best move in this position is just the very simple rook to f1, rook f to d1. So we develop our piece and we improve our worst place piece. And if you look at it from black's point of view, the reason I like this one is that both sides are doing the exact same thing. They're both improving their worst place piece. So basically black has all of their pieces kind of in the center. I mean, the rook has moved over here to c8. And the only piece that's really not taking part in the play is the rook on f8. So the rook should go rook f8 to e8. And here at least you can see it's on this half-open e-file. So it has improved. And this is a case of really simple, calm chess that indicates that somebody has a pretty high level of chess strategic understanding. It's a good example of just calm strategy. Just, all right, I'm going to bring another piece into play. I'm going to bring another one. So when the fight breaks out, I have my boys there. I have more there than my opponent might. So in this case, now with white having all the pieces in play, white can try something like hurling the knight in the center with knight e5, and after knight takes e5, we can actually try to open it up with this pawn capture because now we have some tactical ideas with our rook lining up with the bad bitch on d8. And so if knight h5, we can just move our bishop back, because the knight is attacking the bishop. So I just retreat my bishop. And now this knight is actually in a weird spot right here. You see it has no safe squares. So I am actually threatening to advance my pawn up 2 squares and just capture the knight, which would be trapped. So in this case, black plays g6 to give it some breathing room. And then here I just ended my analysis here with f4. And basically, with a series of simple moves, what we've done is we brought everything into play. We brought our last piece into play, we brought our last brother into play, and then we decided to play aggressively or only play actively once everything was in play. And of course, sometimes you can be more aggressive first, but only if usually only if you have an immediate knockout. But if not, then there's nothing to lose by just bringing something into play, especially if your position is more active than your opponent's. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, this one was actually played in the World Championship just a few days ago. This was played between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. And the funny thing is, these ones always kind of crack me up because the best move is actually an application of the most general, simple strategy that every chess player who's been playing for a little while has heard before. The same idea I've been talking about of bring all your pieces into play, develop all your pieces. And if we look at this position right here, if we look at black's position, the queen has been brought out to the f6 square. The bishops are both in the center. The rook on e8 is defending the e5 pawn, and on the e-file, the only piece that's doing literally nothing is the rook on a8. So here, black should just improve the worst place piece. And I thought the simplest way to do it was just the very straightforward rook a to d8, putting the rook on the half-open file. So sometimes in chess, the most obvious move in the world turns out to be the correct move. And sometimes even great players don't even consider it. Sometimes they overthink. And overthinking in chess can definitely be a problem for a lot of players. So in a position like this, it makes a lot of sense to just bring your last troop into play. So if white goes queen to f3, trying to trade queens, in this case, because black has pretty good pieces in the center, it actually makes sense for him to just kind of keep the queens on the board, keep the fight going, and make white actually defend this a little bit. Make white kind of prove that they can hold everything together. So this was a nice illustration of just improving your worst place piece, improving your only lazy worker who's doing nothing. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, this one was played in a World Championship match. Mikhail Botvinnik as white against Mikhail Tal, played in the World Championship in 1961. And I like this one because it really helps you focus in on the worst place piece. And in a lot of these examples, I try to make it clear by showing one piece that's just doing nothing. And in some of those cases, it's just the rook in the corner. Because if the rook in the corner, you know, like if we look around the board, one useful thing you might want to do is when you're playing games and looking for tactics that might benefit you, look around the board and think about what's undefended. And you may want to do this as often as you can. You know, you see that this rook is not defended by anything. I'll just go around the board and do it. This queen is not defended. This queen is not defended. This knight on f6 is defended by nothing. This rook on h8 is defended by nothing. And our rook in the corner is defended by nothing. So in this particular position, what's the pawn count? 2, 4, 6, 7 for black, 2, 4, 5 for white. So white's down 2 pawns but has a lead in development. And what that means is that if they could bring more forces into play and kind of break this open, then this could be fantastic for them. And the question is, what's our worst place piece? Our worst place piece in this position is our rook in the corner. And you might ask, well, why is it our worst place piece? Because, well, our other rook is in the center on e1, our queen is developed on c2, and these minor pieces are in the center. I mean, they're controlling what's going on in the center, and they're controlling, you know, a number of decent squares around here. The knight might hop around to g3 or something. So in this case, we can play the move h2 to h4. And what this does is it allows us to bring our worst place piece into the game without even moving it. And that's a common thing with rooks in the corner. Sometimes you can just advance a pawn up and bring your rook up, or sometimes not even do that and just threaten to take this pawn, because you see the rook here on h8 is undefended. And that's kind of through an x-ray. We're seeing through the h-pawn, the pawn on h6 right here. So this is a nice case of recognizing that you have one really bad piece and playing the most direct move to bring it into the game. So that's a good case of just recognizing that something is your worst place piece, making sure you bring it in right away. So h4 is a very good move. That's what was played in the game. And then white just kind of blew the position open. They went take, and they went knight to g3, and now it's a very bad position for black's king, because king safety is of the utmost importance, and there's not really much that they can do. So they castled, and then after this capture, you can see there's a very unpleasant pin here, and black just has problems all over the place. So this was ended up being a very decisive position for white within a few moves. So they actually decided to just kind of strengthen their center in this case. But it turned out that black's king was really unsafe, and there was also this tactical problem here. So they decided to defend it, but then now look at the king over here. White just brings in, and notice that in converting this kind of advantage, white's plan is to bring in the last rook, to bring in his brother and bring him to the fight, and then it's going to be all over, because look, there's almost nothing that's defending black's king. It's just kind of an open space. It's an open airfield here. And queen takes e4, take, check, and then bishop to g3. And here you can see there's a very unpleasant pin here. You can see our bishop is operating from long range. So all we're really going to do is we're just going to bring in our last piece. And this is just a nightmare right here. So So white played it like this, and yeah, the point here is that if they take back the knight, now notice the king has no squares. All the squares are covered. The d4 pawn covers c5. So here we just have a checkmate with rook a1 to a6. And all the squares are covered. The rooks defend each other, and the king cannot escape. So a nice execution of domination of a bad king position, and our brothers did all the work. All right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, this is a good one to think about. If you look around the board here for white, what is our worst place piece? You see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have these 5 pieces here. Our knight on d5 looks pretty active. Our bishop on d2 is in the center. It's on a reasonable square. Our knight on f3 is developed in the center. Our rook on a2 is on the open file. So the one piece that's really not doing anything is the bishop on g2. Yes, it's on a kind of safe square, but how can we bring it into action? Well, what we can do is we can play h4. And now, after h4, this diagonal is really dangerous for black, because notice that their knight would be pinned to their rook once we play our bishop to h3. We're just kind of pinning it, and if our bishop can capture that rook, we're winning a good amount of material. So this h4 move, it's a nice case of a simple maneuver, and as I said, you can think of your bishop as kind of like a sniper in a lot of these positions. They so often have really powerful long-range scope, and we tend to just kind of forget about them in a lot of positions. There was a position we looked at earlier where we played a4 and bishop a3, and this is a case where we're playing h4 and bishop h3. And these moves are so easy to miss, but you can see that now our bishop is a dangerous sniper from the corner. From h3, go bishop h3, and now we're succeeding in kind of inflicting damage in the opponent's half of the board. And kind of what I'm doing here is I'm trying to create a bunch of isolated pawns, and I'll show you what I mean. Here, a good thing to be aware of is that we call these doubled and isolated pawns. They're doubled pawns because they're 2 pawns directly in front of each other on the same file, but they're isolated because there's no defending pawn on the adjacent file. So there's no way to really defend these if they come under serious attack, let's put it that way. So what white is able to do is now white has control. I have penetration points in the opponent's camp because now they no longer have, for example, their pawn controlling this square. So now my pieces, at the cost of 1 pawn, are starting to break in. So this works very nicely. And also I have this move where I'm, kind of eyeing this pawn here on h5. So with a couple of moves, things completely change. I'll show that again just so you can see it from the start. So I identify that this is my only lazy worker, and I want to bring him into play. I want to bring my sniper into play. So I go h4, and now I have bishop h3 coming up, bishop to h3, and now that knight is attacked. I'm just going to take that knight if they don't do something. So they bring their king over to try to defend it. They have these problems because notice that their rook also has to watch out for that c7 pawn. So their defenses are getting pretty stretched out. I mean, we're doing a pretty good job of really overworking the defense. So just go h5. And now I bring up my infantry, knight h4, knight d4, and then I just play knight to f4. And the resulting position is very, very good for white. And you can see black has a lot of weaknesses here. So this is a nice case of white's pieces pretty much dominating the game. So anyway, let's go on to the next one. Okay. All right, so here's again a typical kind of thing that can easily come up. We have a situation like this. All right, our king is in sort of a precarious position. It's over here on the sidelines, and the opponent might want to play something like knight to h4, kind of, eyeing the idea of bringing their queen down here. So we have to keep our eyes open here and think about what we want to go for. And in this position, when we're playing with white, let's count the material first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so it's equal material. Our bishop is quite effective because it's cutting off the king. The king is, again, kind of being sniped at. The sniper is preventing the king from running away. So he's kind of under indirect fire. He can't really go anywhere. So again, the usual issue, we don't want to leave a man behind here. We don't want to leave anything out of play. We don't want to jump into going for an all-out attack here if we don't have everything in play. So what we want to do in this case is we just want to bring in our last piece. Our worst placed piece is our rook on a1, our brother. There's going to be a fight starting soon, and we want to bring our brother in to join us. So here I just go rook to g1. Now my rook is here on the open file, and doing quite a useful job here. If they play knight to h4, which is a nice trick, they're trying to take my queen with check and then recapture their queen, you know, because this is a nice little tempo gaining gesture here with knight h4, and I can just simply move my queen out of the way. And if I move my queen back and then play and then bring my rook down like this, now what I've done is, now we have all of our pieces in play. I've just moved away from their threat. I moved away from what their threat was to my queen. Now my rook is attacking their queen, so they just move their queen to safety. And now when I do this, now I have all my pieces in play. I have my bishop here, sniping down here. I have my bros here, hitting g7. I have my bad bitch controlling everything here. I'm threatening to come down here and even give them, I have some threats of back rank mating ideas. And I'm threatening the b7 pawn. So basically, just by bringing everything into play as energetically as possible, not wasting any time, I've established a winning position. So that one wasn't that hard, but it's just about using all of your forces and not forgetting about anybody. We don't, I mean, if we have a great fighter in the corner, we don't want to leave him there. We need to bring him into play. Okay. Okay, this one's easy to miss. This one's very easy to miss. We have the same concept here too. 2, 4, 5. 5 pawns for both sides. Black seems to be pretty solid. You might be looking at this and going, oh, black is just nice, and you know, they have their knight here on d5. They've kind of set up this nice firm blockade, nice and solid. And from white's perspective, well, white has the 2 bishops. They have 2 bishops here, and one of the great things about having the 2 bishops is the unopposed bishop, the dark squared bishop. Notice black has no dark squared bishop. Can be a very dangerous piece because it has no equal. There's nothing to directly counter it. So if that bishop can become a monster on the dark squares where they can't equally challenge it, that'll be a problem. So what I want to do here with white is I'm thinking about how can I bring more forces to bear? Because at the moment, I mean, if we look at what's going on here, we can say we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We do have some pieces here, certainly. But notice the black pawn is defending everything here. We have, you know, 2 knights defending, the queen defending, the king defending, the f7 pawn defending. So you could fairly say they have about 5 defenders and we have about 4 attackers. But we have a very strong attacker here in the corner, this rook on a1. And we would love to bring it into the attack. I would love to, you know, have the queen over here or the rook over here and just kind of try to go for a big attack down the h-file. But how could I do that? And also notice that their rook in the corner is also doing nothing. So I'm thinking, well, I don't want to leave a man behind. I don't want to leave my brother in the corner here. I would love to bring him to the fight. So how can I do that? Well, the best way to do that is the move a4. And I showed something before where we played a4 and then bishop to a3. Here's a case where we're bringing the rook up. We're improving our worst place piece and bringing him all the way over here. And this is a nice little rook lift, like an elevator lift. The rook swings over right into the attack. Boom, boom, comes into h3, and the black king is in big trouble. For example, okay, I just tried to give an example of some moves. Rook to h3, the rook is coming in, and black is already in big trouble. So, a very nice illustration of just of a simple maneuver. I mean, this only costs us, basically, it only costs us 2 moves to play a4 and rook a3. A very easy move to miss. Very, very easy to miss. I think most people would just play some typical move, I don't know, queen to d2, developing their queen, or rook to c1, sliding the rook over, but the move a4 is a very nice move, bringing the rook into the attack. 1, 2. So don't forget about your worst place piece. Don't forget about your passive pieces. If they can come into the attack, they can, I mean, you might totally stun some of your opponents just coming out of nowhere. They're like, wait, where did that rook come from? Well, it came out of the corner, but you know, you can come out from nothing and turn into something great. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, this was a fun one. It was from one of my own games, and I had a position here where I had an extra foot soldier. If we count the pawns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm up a pawn here. I'm up a pawn. You could say I have an extra e3 pawn. But my brothers are not participating. They're not taking part in the battle here. And their king is pretty open. You see they have these pawns advanced. I mean, these dark squares around the king and just these squares in general around here are pretty soft. So what we would like to do here is we would like to bring our pieces. We would like to bring our brothers into the fight. So here, I played the move rook a to c1. So my rook can definitely jump in. I mean, here's a nice square to jump into as one example. And I also have ideas of bringing my other one in. Both of them, I mean, what you'll notice here is that both of them are not in play at all. So I'm going to plan. My plan is, before I launch any kind of attack, I'm going to bring both of them into play. So my opponent played this, rook to d7, and then I brought my rook up. And I noticed I have a very comfortable square right here, a rook square on f4, where if I plant it there, it's a great hiding point. I can just leave my rook there, and I'm targeting this f5 pawn. So basically, it's a nice station for my rook. So my opponent played queen to e5. I brought my other rook over. Here again, same principle. Activity, cooperation. We're cooperating together. We're working together. I'm bringing everything in. So before I launch the final decisive attack here, I'm bringing everything in. I'm setting it all up. And then once the battle breaks out, I'm more prepared than they are. That's the principle here. We're preparing for the final assault. And I don't want to launch a final assault with just one piece or two pieces. I want all three of them there. I want my foot soldier taking place. I want everything in play. So I slid my rook over to that excellent station over here. And my plan now was actually to do this, bring my other one up, and then finally blast open the position with this pawn move, which forces them to break everything open, and then their king is going to be very exposed. So they played this, and now I brought my other rook up, and I'm preparing that break. They played this. All right, I waited a second before I played it. I hesitated for a moment. I didn't need to. I probably shouldn't have. Didn't matter, fortunately. So I played this move, and because they were attacking my pawn on d5, so I just simply defend. And now, you see, I'm all prepared, and you see my queen lined up with their king here. I'm all prepared to blast it open with e4. So now I just blasted it open, and they were helpless. So the key point here is that rather than just jumping into the attack or jumping into creating threats, what I did is I stationed my pieces on the best possible squares, and then I blasted it open. Take, take. Check. And so I opened up the game. I'm attacking their queen. I have a little discovery against their king, and I just played check. And now I traded queens, and now I took the pawn. So everything worked out perfectly, and then I checked their king, and I played a nice little sneaky move here. I played this move, and it's a clever move, because if they take my rook, I take this, and now I'm just going to queen. I'm just going to promote my pawn to a new queen. Once I have a new queen, it's going to be all over. So this is a really sneaky move, very sneaky move. I call it a sliding move. So I'm keeping contact with their piece, but I want him to take here. And my plan is just push this guy down here, get a new queen, and it'll be all over. So the game was basically over. The game was basically over in a few moves. I just took all of their, I took all their stuff, and then I played this, and then the game was over. But a good example of bringing all your men into the fight and then making everything explode. So I'm only initiating the fight when I have all my boys there. All right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, this was an interesting one. This was a game that I played where, let's count the material. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So you'll notice I have 2 rooks and a bishop. They have a rook and 2 minor pieces. So basically, I have a rook for a knight, and a rook is worth almost 2 pawns more than a knight. So essentially, what I need to do is I need to open this position up. But what I want to do is I want everybody in the best position possible for the fight. And so what I did here was I first improved my rook. And I did that to take over this A file. Here's a nice invasion point. I can invade on A8. So I play this, they attack my bishop, I go back. They move their king over, I move my king over. So because there aren't many pieces left on the board, I can use my king nice and actively where I want to in the center of the board. So they played this, I went bishop here. I played B3, just controlling this square so their knight can't move. I can't move there. So they're just kind of fiddling around. They're trying to be solid. And what I did was I thought, all right, well, I'm going to improve everything. I'm going to improve my rooks. I'm going to improve my king. I'm going to have the most active possible forces. And then when the fight breaks out, I'm going to be ready for it. My pieces are going to be in the best possible position for this. So they move their knight back. I move my bishop to a nice active spot. They brought their king up. I moved my rook over. And so I was kind of toying with the idea of threatening a pawn here, but for the moment, I'm just sort of preparing the final assault. And so I brought my rook down, and now, okay, I was, again, trying to play with some threats here. It wasn't totally clear what my final threat was going to be, but for the moment, they're just kind of trying to stay solid. It's kind of like I've pushed them to the edge, and they're just sitting there like, oh, please don't kill me. They're just kind of moving back and forth. They're trying to remain solid. They're trying to build a fortress. They're trying to build a fortress so that I can't penetrate. So I came up with a nice plan here. I played this. I'm keeping an eye on this c6 pawn. So they attacked my rook. I moved it back. And now, let's see, what did I do here? I just simply moved up my rook. And now they were hoping to just shuffle their piece back and forth, but I caught them. I caught him with a great trap. And the trap was based on what we call an X-ray. The bishop on E8 is undefended. And I noticed that if I could blast this open, now I'm totally ready to break this all open because, I mean, their men are pretty passive here. So now I blew it open with the move D5. And they decided to not even continue playing because if they take it, I take. And now you can see that what I've done is I've just blasted this open. And now my rook can take that bishop on E8, which is not defended. So if they take, then I take, and this is a pretty devastating pin, so it's going to be all over very, very soon. So this was another case where before launching the final assault, I put all of my men in the best possible position. And the reason I did that is because I couldn't break their fort right away. I had to prepare it first. So that is a common way that attacks take place. That's a common thing in terms of attacking is that, well, let's say they have a couple of pieces defending. Well, if we just have a few pieces attacking, the attack really is unlikely to work just on numerical terms. But if we put everything in the best possible position, keep them tied up, and then we go for the assault at the best possible moment, then we're controlling the initiative. Then we're controlling what's going on. It's like we can strike when we want to. Once we establish weakness, then we can finally strike. So Let's go on to the next one. Here's a good one. Again, we've been talking about don't leave a man behind, and that can also mean when you have a piece on the side, of the board. I talked about another example earlier where there was a move like this, like g2, g4, attacking a knight in the corner, or on the side, I should say, on the side of the board. And in this case, this knight on h5 needs to come back and can actually be a very good piece if you could bring it into somewhere like, I don't know, if you could bring it over here. So what Black played here was the very nice move. He played a very nice move after identifying that this is his worst placed piece. He played the move g5. And what this does is now the knight can just come right back into action. So rather than being in the basement at my office, just in the basement with no electricity, unable to do anything, suddenly my knight comes in and he's a full-fledged worker. He's working hard here. And he's a trained killing machine. So my close-range infantry is coming here into the center. So this is a nice little move to be aware of. Again, what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about cooperation, activity, worst placed pieces, and I'm thinking about I'm thinking about, all right, well, what is my opponent's idea? What are they threatening? And what's my worst placed piece? And these actually coincide. It's the same answer. My opponent's threatening to win my piece, and my worst placed piece is my knight on h5. So I play this, and then I just bring it back. So it works very nicely. It works very nicely for Black in playing as actively as possible, and as you can see here, we have some nasty geometry going on here, a nasty pin from our long range, our sniper, as I said, little snipey. Little snipey on h7, pinning that rook on b1. A very nice case of a long range killer. So this is fantastic for white, or for Black, I should say. Let's go on to the next one. Okay. So here's another one where we have to think about, all right, well, how can we play as actively as possible? We want to be active, we want to be coordinated, we want to have our men working together. How can we do that? Well, in looking at white's position, the knight on c1 is pretty passive. It's not really doing much. So I want to bring it into action. How do I bring it into action? Well, I don't really like putting the knight here because actually there's a nice little trick. This is a nice little trick because you'll see that their knight is then attacking my bishop on e3 and my rook on d2. My bishop on e3 is undefended. Let's scan the board here just for fun to look around at what's undefended. So my rook on b1 is not defended. My bishop on e3 is not defended. And the pawn on b7 is not defended. But for the most part, the issue with undefended pieces is more of an issue for white. So what I can do here is I just play knight to a2. And you might think, oh, isn't that a weird move? Didn't you just move it to the side of the board? Well, I'm coming right into the center. So a knight on the side of the board isn't necessarily bad as long as it can come in. So it's coming into c3. So Black plays f5. I take it. And now, again, in two moves, first of all, I'm improved my knight. Second of all, I'm allowing my rook to come in. I'm allowing my brother to come in and join the fight. And so now I've improved my knight, I've brought my rook in, and now I can chase this back, and my knight is right here ready for battle. So they play knight a5. All right, so they're threatening the b3 pawn, so I can come over and defend it. Sure, no problem. They play b6, and this is nice because what white has done is white has taken control of the position and slowly improved everything. So I improved my knight, then I improved my rook, then I gained some space and made their piece worse with this g4 push, which was a nice little move. And then I brought my king into the game. And now I have more improving moves. Here's another great move. My bishop here on e2 is kind of blocked in by my pawns. So what I can do is I can play this move, hitting this, and now I have possibilities of bringing the bishop in. So I not only started off improving my knight, then I improved my rook. Then I improved my king, then I improved my bishop. This is a nice case of coordination, constant improvement, constantly building up. We're building up our forces, and as we keep improving, our position gets better and better. So here, we just gradually built up everything. Bishop e4. And in this final position, now we kind of have all of our pieces in an ideal position right here. We have excellent pieces here. And they're a bit soft over here. They're a bit soft over here on the king side. So now we can launch a pawn assault to break things open over here. You can see there's some undefended things over here. So we blast it open. And now we have these two pawns here. We call these connected pass pawns. So we have these two pawns here which have the potential to kind of storm up the board. So we've made tremendous progress, and here I'm even picking off a pawn. So a very nice illustration, and this was the end of the game actually. White just totally dominated everything. So this game was a beautiful case of the domination of the bishops. They just totally took care of Black's passive forces, but this one was all about building up. This one was just about almost every single move was improving the worst place piece. Constant buildup, constant buildup, constant buildup. And you know what? A direct assault in this position didn't work. So we just had to gradually build up. And as we built up everything, suddenly the opponent, their position just started falling apart, started disintegrating. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so now I want to talk about one thing which is connected to all of this. We've been talking about piece activity and coordination. We've been talking about don't leave a man behind. Don't leave your brothers behind. Focus on cooperation. Focus on working together. Focus on having as many boys at the fight as possible. So one thing which is connected to all this is opening strategy. And I want to talk about some of the main openings in chess just so you have a kind of idea. And I'm going to lay out three principles. There are three core principles that you want to take advantage of in the opening. The first one is controlling the center with pawns, and let's think of it this way. It's basically holding down the fort. It's staking a claim. So first you want to stake a claim, okay? The second thing you want to do is develop your pieces. So that basically means set up your troops. So stake a claim, set up your troops. And the third thing is protect your king. And that essentially means establish your home base. Essentially set up a security system. You want to, protect what's rightfully yours. So what we want to do in the opening is we want to stake a claim in the center. We want to set up our troops, and we want to set up our home security system. We want to set up our home base. So stake a claim, hold the fort, and establish your home base. And I'm going to show you just some examples, and we're going to talk about how we can see these principles being applied by both sides. It's very interesting, but every major opening actually applies all three of these principles. And so let me just show you. Some of the moves may seem complicated, but if you think about it in those terms, it makes sense. So let's go through this. Okay. So if d4 is played, let's say d4, knight of6, c4, and basically I do also want to say that when a knight goes to f6 like this, they're preventing e4. They're preventing the pawn from coming up because then they can just take the pawn. And so what they're doing is, in a way, they are actually staking a claim. They're going to put pawns in the center later, but at the moment they're controlling the center. So knight of 6, c4, e6, and now, okay, so now you can see both sides have their claim here. They've both set up a central pawn structure, and they've kind of laid their stake. They've laid their claim here, and they usually want to hold down the fort and keep things where they are. So now the plan for most of them, as you see, there are a lot of pieces to develop here. There are a lot of pieces to bring into play here. So usually what both sides are going to try to do is they're going to try to find a way to bring these forces into play and to find a place to put their king. And I didn't mention it before, but it's very important to have a good handling on castling. And castling is when you move your king over 2 squares and then your rook hops right over it. It's very important to be aware that castling is a thing, because that's probably going to be how you're going to protect your king in maybe 90% of your games. So in this instance, we just see white developing the pieces. We're trying to figure out how to develop these. Bishop to b4. Okay, so black develops his last piece on the king side, and now in many cases they may want to just protect their king. Bishop to g5. Okay, so white pins the black knight and also sets up his troops. Black plays h6 to challenge this bishop, and white decides to capture. Black captures back. And basically what ended up happening here is basically black wanted to exert some pressure in the center if the bishop had moved back. So white gives up a bishop, but the point is that white is very, very secure here. A normal way of developing the pieces is like this. I might just simply bring my rook in, improving my worst placed piece, develop my bishop, and then castle my king, which simultaneously brings my brother into play. So I'm bringing everything in nice and slowly. You can see. So the first thing is both sides have their central pawn structure set up. They have a fort set up in the center. They also are setting up their troops, and they're establishing their home base for their king. So let's just play a few more moves. They castle. Okay, so what they've done is they've just moved their king over 2 squares, and then the rook hops over it. And this can only be played when both the king has not moved and the rook has not moved. So neither of those pieces have moved yet, and that's why we're able to castle. So we castle, and white is going to castle in a few moves too. So I bring the rook over to support the knight on c3. I avoid any kind of tactical messes or anything, and black decides to take, and then decides to strike back at the center with a pawn, which usually is necessary sooner or later. Usually they need to strike back. So white here simply castles the king, and I'm just going to play a few more moves just to give us a typical scenario. And now black would like to develop the knight to c6, but would like to capture back with the bishop so that it's nice and active right here on the c6 square. So anyway, in this position there are a bunch of different moves, but as we can see, the central situation has been kind of resolved. Both sides have many of their pieces in play, and their kings are both safe. This king has been castled, this king has been castled, and yeah, we have quite a nice position here on the board. So if black plays this, I play queen to b3, attacking this bishop on b4. Black defends it with a5, and basically the plan here is, as you've seen here, with a couple of moves played, now black has developed the knight. Almost all of black's pieces are in play now, and almost all of white's are too. So this is just a typical illustration of how both of the sides might hold down the fort, set up their troops, and establish their home base. So I'm going to show, this was a case of when they play d4. I'm going to show some other cases of when they play e4 or when they play c4. So let me go back and let's look at it in other scenarios. Okay, so what if I go c4? Okay, so I want to show a typical development scheme for both sides. So black plays e5, and what we're seeing here is both sides are controlling space in the center, and now black can develop their knight and find a place to put their bishop on one of these squares usually and castle their king. So essentially they're laying a stake in the center. They're trying to set up their troops quickly, and they're trying to establish their home base for their king. So white develops a piece with knight to c3, setting up his troops. Black also develops knight to f6, and notice how they're both controlling the center. White plays knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5. Black sets up a troop on c6, also defending the e5 pawn so it's not loose. And now white plans to finish his development by putting his bishop on g2. We call this a fianchettoed bishop, that's just the name, and then trying to castle. So black, for his part, plays the move d5, again holding down the fort, controlling the center with pawns, laying stake, basically his claim here in the center. Take, and now essentially white's plan is just to castle the king, and then to slowly develop the pieces and bring everything into play. So black plays bishop to c5. He brings out his bishop, castles, castles. So as you can see here, black has a claim in the center. He has developed his pieces. A bunch of these pieces are in play, and he's found a way to protect his king. So notice how both sides are energetically pursuing the exact same three goals. That's very important to be aware of. So white just simply goes d3. Black plays rook to e8. Again, improving a worse placed piece, improving a rook that wasn't doing anything. And now white, let's say for example, if they trade knights in the center, this is just for example, take, they develop a piece, and okay, I might just get out of the way. You know, my queen was lined up with the bishop. Okay, I just move my queen out of the way, and my plan now is to develop my last piece. So I can comfortably develop this final piece. You know, I can just bring it over here, and all of my pieces can quickly come into play. So you can see I have a claim in the center with the e5 pawn. I have my pieces developed, and I have my king safe. Both of the kings are castled. And white, for his part, has most of his pieces here in play too. He can play rook c1, developing his rook, and then he just has to solve the problems of what to do with the remaining pieces. So let me show one more typical opening, and this isn't really to, you know, tell you what to play or anything. It's basically just to lay out what is basic opening strategy. We're holding down the fort, we're setting up our troops, and we're protecting our king. So we're just getting everything out. We're securing ourselves in the center, and we're securing our king. So if we play e4, a typical response, of course there are many, you know, all of the moves that challenge the center, like with d5 or e6 and d5 or c5, all of these moves are controlling the center. So these are the four most common moves for black. And e5 is the most common, just symmetrical, and if knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5, the most common response is just to play knight c6, defending the pawn, and typically white will develop the bishop. And here's an interesting point. I just want to point this out really quickly. If they take on c6, you might think, oh, I'm winning a pawn with this move knight takes e5, but notice that this knight is undefended. It's not defended by another piece. This pawn on e4 is undefended, so black has a nice move in queen to d4, attacking that undefended knight and this pawn. And what that means is that black has the bishop pair and will recapture this pawn back. So black definitely will not be worse from this. That's an important little trick to be aware of, but that's not the point of why I'm showing you this. Usually white will just retreat, and I just want to show you how black is bringing the pieces out. Because usually black will develop the knight, will find a safe square for the bishop, and then simply castle the king. And white will try to do the same type of thing. So white castles, black plays bishop to e7. Nice, simple, and solid. White plays rook to e1, defending the pawn on e4 with the rook. Black plays b5 to push the bishop away so that it's no longer threatening the knight on c6, so that we don't have problems with that pawn. And now we can just castle our king. If they play this, we just play d6, and now we've done a pretty good job. We've castled our king, so both sides have found a safe place for the king. Both sides have established a central pawn structure, which is nice, firm, and solid. And both sides are now developing their pieces. So white's going to figure out what do I do with these guys, and black's figuring out what do I do with these guys. So I'm just going to play a few more moves just to kind of illustrate how this usually goes. Black goes, attacking the bishop here, knight to a5. And now I play the move c5. And again, I'm basically staking a claim in the center, and if white plays the move d4, again, challenging the center. I don't really want to give up my claims here. I don't want to take twice because that's a little passive. I'm giving something up. I just want to be nice and solid. So I just go queen c7, and I secure everything here. So this is a good illustration of opening strategy. We're controlling the center with pawns, we're developing our pieces, we're protecting our king. The only fourth thing you want to do in the opening is maybe make or react to threats, but those aren't core strategies. The core strategy is make sure your central pawn structure is good, make sure your pieces are out, and make sure your king is safe. Those are the three main things to think about. So that's important because if you just do that more energetically than your opponent, you might just be getting big advantages every game with both colors. So I want to show you a typical case of what happens if your opponent plays the opening badly. Let's say if they do leave a man behind. What if they don't control the center? Okay. So some people will fool around and play on the side of the board without doing anything. And the best analogy, like I said before, is kind of like the home invasion analogy. It's sort of like, well, you know, you're trapped on the side of the board, you can barely do anything, and these people are just dominating your whole city. They're just dominating you. They're controlling everything. They can switch between sides easily. And here's a nice case. I'm just going to show a typical example of what white can do. You see my pawns are controlling the center here. By the way, this is called an ideal pawn center. If you can establish this at no cost and support it, then it's almost always a good idea to have. So black is just kind of, you know, playing a little passively, trying to develop their pieces. I play knight f3, b6. So again, I'm just saying what happens if they just play a little bit passively. I want to show some active ideas. I can play this very nice aggressive plan, and you might wonder, why is the bishop here? Well, the bishop is sort of annoying for black because of this pin here. And it's also the question of what do they do with their pieces to develop. So let's say I play bishop to b7. Now I play bishop c4, and you can see my pieces are pretty well placed. My knights are defending each of the pawns. My bishops are actively placed. My bishop here on c4 is pretty nicely placed, eyeing the f7 pawn. Notice that I'm not going to sacrifice it, but I'm going to prepare. I'm preparing for an assault. I'm bringing everything in, so I have my 4 minor pieces out, and I'm preparing to go for the final assault. So they go d6, and now I have this nice shot with e5. And now you can see, what does black do? The knight can't come out because I'll just take it. And I mean, I'm totally ready to blast everything open. So I developed all 4 of my minor pieces. Black has just been fooling around a bit. Now, boom, I play e5, start to blast it open. And if they play d5, just trying to close it, all right, perfectly fine, I'll go back. And let's say black plays f6, attacking my bishop. A very nice move to restrict their pieces and keep them passive is a very calm move, the move bishop to f4. And what this does is it doesn't allow him to develop the knight right away. I'm keeping it passive because I'm just keeping it kind of locked out of play and making them take longer to figure out, well, how do I develop that? So if they play knight h6, I take and I'm opening up lines. I check on e2, and now I have a nice little sequence. If they move the king to f8, just out of the way, I play the move queen to e6, and now this is quite a disaster with all of the weaknesses around the king. So this is a nice case of just a few moves, a few passive moves by black, leading to a terrible position. So let me illustrate that again. And I also want to say something that is very weird to me, is that when I first started playing chess, I was taught that the ideal setup, if you have a bunch of moves, is to go d4, e4, knight c3, knight f3, bishop c4, bishop f4. But it actually turns out that with the bishop stationed here on g5, it's more menacing. And part of the reason why it's more menacing is it's eyeing some of these pieces and eyeing the queen and making it harder for the g8 knight to come into play. So this is a pretty brutal setup if the opponent is super, super passive. So let me show you another one. I have one more to show you on this theme. So what happens if white plays passively? Let me show you a typical case. So g3 is not a bad move, by the way, but they have to follow it up accurately. So let's say they just let me occupy the center. They play a double fianchetto strategy, we call it, with the fianchettoed bishop on g2 and on b2. What do we want to do? So I filled up the center with pawns. My ideal pawn center is established. And let's say, so I go knight f6, they go bishop to b2, attacking my e5 pawn, it's defended. So what I can do here is a very nice move. I can play the move h5. It's quite an annoying move for them because what if I just advance my pawn and harass that bishop on g2? They have to be careful about it. So they might try to stop me. Fine. Now I can play a similar move, bishop to g4, like we were looking at in the previous case with reverse colors, I'm again playing this very annoying move, pinning the pawn and making it hard to develop. So let's say they play this. I can play e4, chasing the knight away. And if the knight moves to g5, now I can chase the knight away again with f6. And if they go back, I can play bishop to d6. And now my bishop is eyeing this square, so if they ever go here, I can just take it and destroy their pawn structure on the king side. So let's say castles. I go queen d7. And here, as you can see, white has been really passive, and now he's in some real danger because I'm already threatening to attack that. I'm already attacking that knight on h3. So just with a few passive moves from white, they really end up in quite a bit of danger. So this is something to think about. If your opponent plays really passively, you can play actively in the center, establish a nice strong pawn center, and then what you can do from there is you can play very aggressively with your pieces. And if you have 3, 4, 5 pieces in play, then you may find that you're just attacking material and winning a lot of material. So hopefully this is very clear. Don't leave a man behind. Don't leave your brothers behind. Play energetically. And in the opening phase, control the center with pawns, develop your pieces quickly, and make sure your king is safe. These are all very important, and let's move on to the final chapter.